So hopefully you found that kind of interesting. They talk a little bit fast, but the basic premise is that during certain stages of pregnancy, exposure to the flu virus may cause, people who are genetically predisposed to develop schizophrenia as they age. Maybe, right? So we have this basic research on schizophrenia, trying to figure out what factors may contribute to schizophrenia. And then now we have this very applied issue, which is if a woman is pregnant, she's usually offered a flu vaccine as part of her prenatal treatment. Because in case that it turns out to be, valid that exposure to flu virus triggers schizophrenia, well, then we can do something very applied about that and administer a flu vaccine. How about behaviorism? How has it applied basic research? So basic research, you're going back to the very beginning of psychology if you talk about behaviorism, right? Because that was like the most basic of all basic research, trying to figure out how different kinds of stimuli can elicit different kinds of responses in a learner. So very early, like 1950s, researchers discovered that you can engender learned helplessness in a learner by giving them no way to escape an aversive stimulus. In the old research, they had dogs that were in wire cages, and for some of the dogs, the cage was divided in half, and if they jumped the barrier, they could escape the shock that they were getting on their feet and land on the other side of the cage where the shock wasn't. Other dogs were in a cage that the whole floor was being electrified, and so even if they jumped the barrier, they still got shocked. So you have some dogs that could escape the shock and some dogs that couldn't. And the dogs that couldn't, even if the game changed and they actually made it so that the other side of the cage was not being electrified, once the dogs had learned that jumping the barrier was useless, they developed learned helplessness where they wouldn't even try. They wouldn't try and escape the shock. And so this kind of learned helplessness caused the dogs to then just sort of sit there and wait for the next bad thing to happen. They wouldn't take proper steps to avoid it, even if they could, because they had learned that they were helpless. So basic research, and it's now being applied with humans and being talked about more about how your attitudes can be evidence of learned helplessness. Not that necessarily you've been being shocked and didn't know you could escape it, but instead that you start to feel like you're not in control of your own outcomes. And so you can actually display classically conditioned learned helplessness. And so clinicians and counselors are using that information to try and counsel people into feeling a little bit more what they call agenic, where they are agents in their own outcomes. So I thought maybe you guys would enjoy hearing this guy who talks about here's how you can start to feel a little bit less helpless and a little bit more full of agency. So I'll let you check him out.